With this month's webinar, feel free to type in any questions that you have in the questions box that should be on your screen. And at the end of the presentation, we will do our best to answer all of the questions. If during the course of the webinar you have an issue with audio quality or picture quality for the webinar, a lot of times those issues can be corrected by simply logging out of the webinar, closing your browser, and then opening it back up and logging back into the webinar. This month, it's a real treat for everyone. We have Jeana Wiser from the Preservation Green Lab. And for those of you who don't know what the Preservation Green Lab is, it was launched back in March of 2009 by the National Trust for Historic Preservation. So it's a Seattle-based office, and they advance research that explores the value that older buildings bring to their communities. And the Preservation Green Lab also works to pioneer policy solutions that make it easier to reuse and to green older and historic buildings. The Green Lab seeks to minimize carbon impacts from the built environment through direct emissions reductions from building retrofits and to conserve character-rich and human-scale communities that attract people to more sustainable urban living patterns. And we're pleased to welcome Jeana Wiser, the Associate Program Manager from Preservation Green Lab, to speak at the webinar today. Jeana, as Associate Project Manager, plays a key role in research and policy initiatives that build upon the intersection of preservation and sustainability. Some of her current work is with two of the Green Lab's primary programs. One is America Saves, and the other is the Partnership for Building Reuse, where she lends her expertise in project management, collaboration with academic partners, GIS mapping, data analysis, and outreach. Recently, she has become more involved with exploring the relationship between older buildings and climate change and the role of adaptation and resilience. The work that she's doing is currently being applied in Annapolis, Maryland, through her participation on the National Trust's National Treasure Team, as well as active involvement with ULI and other national partners. Before joining the Preservation Green Lab in 2011, Jeana attended the University of Washington in Seattle and earned a master's degree in urban planning with a certificate in historic preservation. She's a member of the Association for Preservation Technology's Technical Committee on Sustainable Preservation, the Urban Land Institute Los Angeles, and she also serves on the steering committee of a New Orleans-based nonprofit, Building Resilience Workshop. They convene diverse sets of stakeholders to explore innovative strategies to build greater resilience, both physical and social, in South Louisiana. So without further ado, I will go ahead and turn it over to Jeana.
Thanks, Frank. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for having me this afternoon. I'm really excited to be presenting the work of the Green Lab to Heritage Ohio. This is a great opportunity for us to just talk about what we do at the Green Lab, and then more specifically talk about some of the overlapping work that we are doing through the Green Lab in Ohio currently. So that'll be really exciting, and we can get into that a little bit more at the end of the presentation if any of you are interested with specific questions related to our work in Ohio. I just wanted to make a quick little mention before I start the presentation that I'm sitting in our the National Trust Chicago office today, and that means that there will be trains and sirens. So I just wanted to give everybody the heads up that there might be some background noise, but I'll do my best to keep it quiet. So I'm going to go ahead and jump in to our first slide. So as Frank kind of gave the overview of the Green Lab, talking about our mission and our purpose, the things that we really care about, I think the words here that are bolded really stand out and say the most about what we do, which is strengthen the fabric of communities by leveraging the value of existing buildings. And in doing so, we are reducing resource waste, creating jobs, and bolstering a strong sense of community. At the Green Lab, the whole team at the Green Lab really cares about communities, people, and buildings, and how buildings play a significant role in creating community and fostering that sense of community that we all really care about, especially when you've got great older buildings that have a lot of character. So just to kind of show you where we're at, although we started in Seattle, actually 5 years ago in June was our 5-year anniversary this last June, just 2 months ago. So we started 5 years ago in the city of Seattle and in Washington State. But since then, we were kind of growing. We have still our home base in Seattle, but we have additional staff in Los Angeles, Denver, and DC at the National Trust headquarters. So we are now a staff of 7. We started as probably a staff of 2, you could say. So we've definitely grown, and we'll probably continue to do so as the years progress. But I just wanted to make a point that we are, at least covering almost all of the time zones here in the country. And even though we are not everywhere, the whole team travels quite a bit. So like I said, I'm in Chicago and the Midwest right now for some America Saves work, and the other team members are all over as well, which is great because we really get to experience the country. So I was hoping to share a quick video here, and I'm not sure how that's actually going to work. So maybe, Frank, you could let me know if you can hear the volume. I actually just don't know how videos work with this. But I'm going to try it, and if it doesn't work, I can provide the link afterwards. But this is a little short video that we put together to just kind of talk about what we do at the Green Lab. It was for, maybe this isn't going to work.
Well, if you have speakers coming out of your computer and you put your phone up to the speakers, we might be able to hear it, but we should be able to see it okay.
Okay, yeah. Okay, yeah, let's give it a try. Oh, shoot. Okay. I'm going to start it over. It might be too quiet.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I didn't test it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you might have to give us a synopsis of what he's saying.
That's totally fine. I'm sorry about that.
No problem.
Yeah, I probably should have tested that. But anyway, I will definitely provide the link to everybody. I'll make sure to provide it to you, Frank, so you can pass it along to everybody that's on the call.
Okay, that would be great.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so I'll move on. So this is just kind of, we have some headlines, I think, that continue to capture why we care about what we care about, which is these older buildings in communities that have a great sense of character. So one of the things that we see, like, we always talk about buildings in relation to people, and so in our pictures as well. And so we really like to try to make that connection. So I really like this photo because it just demonstrates how essential these buildings are, the older buildings in the community, to the type of community this is, where people are out and interacting with each other, and there's a sense of, oftentimes a sense of authenticity in these communities. So we like to try to capitalize on that as much as possible, that feeling or the desire to be in a place that is quote-unquote authentic. Another really great thing about these older, smaller buildings is that they are often the incubators for innovation. A lot of startups and small businesses like to locate in older, smaller buildings. And so this really taps into the creative class, the people who make things, the artists. It gives them spaces that are affordable, oftentimes more affordable than new buildings, and also places that are just interesting with character. Affordable spaces, just like I mentioned. The older, smaller buildings really tend to support small business, local business, which is awesome because that's contributing to the local economy and the sense of place. Another really cool opportunity is that oftentimes older buildings, maybe not even the super small buildings, but just older existing buildings are great opportunities for reuse and for new investment. And this is a really great example of an old warehouse building in Philadelphia in the Navy Yard, which had all of these old Navy buildings that had in past times been used for the Navy, but now it's kind of undergoing this really interesting redevelopment where they're using the offices, or they're using the buildings for offices, such as Urban Outfitters actually having their headquarters there. And this is just a really cool space here that actually, it's sort of a gathering meeting place, including their cafeteria. But just a really cool example of the character that's just embedded in these buildings that offer such great spaces. Another idea is that older, smaller buildings reinforce the fabric of community. So it allows cities and communities to grow smarter in hot markets, but then also kind of zero in on the assets and the hot zones in cooling markets where you might want to, where there's a little bit of something going on. Often those places have existing buildings, and you might want to try to focus investment in those parts of the city, even in cooling market cities. So what can we do to tap into this opportunity is, well, we can start by saving the buildings, making them better, reusing them, including energy efficiency upgrades and retrofits to make them perform better. All of these things are tied to kind of really community development strategies. So those are kind of the bigger picture ideas about what drives a lot of the work that we do at the Green Lab. So as a foundation, we really started 5 years ago as a, heavy into research. We wanted to do as much original research as we could to really kind of identify our strengths and expertise in this area. And so to date, we have actually 6 reports. One is missing here, a technical report that was produced 3 years ago about district energy. But these are our kind of cornerstone reports here, starting back with our first big report called The Greenest Building in January of 2012, which really underlined the environmental value of building reuse. This is the life cycle assessment, the argument for reusing a building for environmental reasons rather than demolishing. And then moving over to the Saving Windows, Saving Money. This was our report released in October of 2012, where we looked at very specific strategies for retrofitting and repairing existing windows, old windows in houses. So this is kind of our residential report that really looks at energy efficiency strategies through windows, not replacing old windows, but repairing them and retrofitting them. So that's really nice that we have that report, because so much of our work is primarily focused on commercial and mixed use. And moving down to June 2013, we had the Realizing the Energy Efficiency Potential of Small Buildings. I'll get into this a little bit later, but this is really a big chunk of our work. This actually led to the development of the America Saves program, which is the energy efficiency program for small business. I'll get to that later, but this report really laid the groundwork for that and helped us develop an expertise in this area. In October of 2013, we kicked off our Partnership for Building Reuse with the Urban Land Institute, where we look at barriers and opportunities for building reuse in big cities, starting with LA. I'll also get into this a little bit more in a few minutes. And then our most recent report was released in May of 2014, which is the Older, Smaller, Better report, where we really looked at metrics around how older, smaller buildings contribute to neighborhood vitality. And we did that through a statistical analysis, and we used 3 different case study cities to kind of compare and contrast different neighborhoods and metrics. And I'll also get into that in a little bit as well. So a lot of our work can really be just kind of separated into 2 different buckets: retrofit work and reuse work. So retrofitting existing smaller, older buildings through the lens of energy efficiency and performance. And then the reuse side is really kind of the policy side, trying to influence policy to make it easier to reuse buildings. And the bullets underneath each heading just kind of touches on some of our different projects and programs. So now I'm going to go into kind of an overview of 3 of our main areas of work right now, which is America Saves. I'll talk about that first. And then the next one will be the Partnership for Building Reuse with the Urban Land Institute. And then the third one will be the Older, Smaller, Better report that I just mentioned. So starting with America Saves is our Department of Energy funded 3-year program that, well, it just kicked off almost a year ago. The end of September of this year will be the end of year 1. But we did a lot of work leading up to that, probably 3 or 4 years worth of work leading up to that, including that report that I just mentioned about the energy efficiency potential and opportunities in small buildings, where we really developed an expertise around older and smaller buildings and energy efficiency. In the energy efficiency marketplace, oftentimes most of the attention is driven towards big buildings where you can kind of just, they have huge budget, you can go in and make a ton of improvements and see, results for sure. But in doing so, you're overlooking a lot of these older, smaller buildings that make up the neighborhoods and the commercial districts that are in every city in the country. And so that's what we're doing with this America Saves program. And the Department of Energy was very enthusiastic about kind of tapping into this overlooked market that they, gave us money to pursue this program, which is awesome. So where we started was this development of an expertise around older, smaller buildings and energy efficiency, like I mentioned. So we partnered with 10 universities across the country in these cities that you see on the map here, where we used grad students in preservation programs, architecture programs, urban planning programs to survey a lot of these buildings in their cities and neighborhoods. We wanted to develop a database that essentially created profiles of different types of older, smaller, commercial and mixed-use buildings, so we really understood the makeup of these buildings. What did they look like? What types of heating and cooling systems do they have in them? How often are they updated? What types of businesses are in these buildings? So, for example, we worked in Denver, Colorado, where we took neighborhoods. We looked at these buildings in clusters of neighborhoods and corridors, because we also like the idea of looking at a neighborhood where we could say, okay, this is what this neighborhood looks like. Not only does it have this individual building here and here, and we know a little bit about each of those, we also can tell you something about the neighborhood in aggregate. And so these are just some of the photos and the buildings identified that were included in the survey, as well as some of the types of information and characteristics that were gathered through the survey. So here's just some of the typical blocks. This, as you can see, this looks pretty similar to a Main Street community. So even back when we were doing this survey, we kind of started realizing just by even looking at the photos that, oh, hey, these are all kind of like Main Street communities. This is what, these are the types of neighborhoods that typically have these older, smaller buildings with a lot of great local business, new businesses. So we even gathered some neighborhood history. So ultimately what we found was, like, in general, we found that, small buildings are often located in these business districts of similar building types, and especially in the older neighborhoods and older parts of town. And so you'll find these clusters in every city all across the country, and we absolutely found that through our survey. And there were commonalities amongst the buildings all across the board. So after we developed this database and pretty solid understanding of this type of building, older, smaller, commercial, and mixed use, we started thinking about, okay, well, how many buildings in the country fit into this category? So it's crazy, but 95% of commercial buildings are small, under 50,000 square feet. So when we talk about older, smaller buildings, what we are referring to is a building that's under 50,000 square feet, which 50,000 square feet is pretty significant. So a lot of buildings, that's why 95% of commercial buildings in numbers are less than 50,000 square feet. And then the older part is a little negotiable. It's kind of maybe around 1970, something like that. It's not as hard of a cutoff as the size is, the 50,000 square feet. But anyways, once you start totaling that up, you can make estimates that in terms of number of buildings, there's 4.4 million small buildings in the country. And then there's also, when you start thinking about the businesses that are in the building, 5.9 million small businesses. And these numbers were pulled from reasonable sources, federal sources probably. So then going a little bit smaller in scale, or a little bit more detailed, these businesses and buildings are found in, historic districts, bids, business associations, and so we started thinking about the structure, the organizing structure for these buildings, that there's usually some organizing body that sort of oversees or supports these buildings and includes staff and volunteers that know business owners. And so we thought of Main Street for sure, business improvement districts, downtown associations, historic districts. That totals up to a estimated number of 5,000 places, 1.5 million small businesses. So we were really trying to think about how can we take our research and take it to scale through an energy efficiency program first geared towards this market. So this is a big scale, 1.5 million small businesses potentially in reach through this organizing structure here. Another interesting thing to point out that our report identified was that the older buildings that you see in the red, represented in the red up to 1969, when you look at actual energy performance, these buildings perform relatively well. They perform better than the buildings built between 1970 and 1999. And so it's just something that's important to note, that these buildings are inherently efficient to a certain extent because they were built during a time that the buildings weren't able to rely on systems as much, heating and cooling systems. They had to have operable windows. So there's all of these great inherent qualities in these older, smaller buildings that already make them compatible for energy efficiency. Something else that our survey found that was very clear that I mentioned just a few minutes ago is that Main Street really was the predominant building type that we found in these business districts. So like the small freestanding building with a restaurant, the multi-use building, maybe 2 stories with a couple of businesses on the first floor and some residential units on the second floor. This was definitely the majority of our buildings, building types that we found through our survey. And so we realized that that was a building type that we wanted to focus on. So this is kind of coming around to America Saves now and how we talk about America Saves. So all of that led up to the development of America Saves and this focus on partnering with Main Street and other small business organizing entities like BIDs or CDCs. And so a couple of the things that America Saves does through energy efficiency in this for older, smaller buildings is that it's reducing the carbon emissions from the built environment while enhancing economic sustainability. We're really looking to, at the end of the day, just save money help the building owners save money so they can turn around and invest that back in their business. And hopefully that will affect the sustainability and long-term viability of their business by saving money on their utility bills. So we see energy efficiency as a tool to help sustain and enhance Main Street. So to that point, this is a really great chart that also came out of our report that shows the percentage or utilities as a percentage of rent. So for a small office on the right-hand side, you can see that the utility bills represent, the utility bills, the percentage of rent is the highest for a small office in terms of utility bills. When you go to an institutional office, their rent is very high, but they're relative to their utilities. But then the utilities are relatively high compared to rent for a small office. And so that just means that if the small office is saving money on their utility bill, then they're going to see a more significant savings, a more noticeable savings than a large institutional office saving some money on their utilities. This kind of gets at the same thing. It shows the red line represents like a restaurant on Main Street. So if a restaurant on Main Street saves 50% on their utility bills, they're going to see a big swing in their net profit versus the blue line, which is another like professional large office building. They're not going to see as significant of an upward swing in their profit as a small restaurant on Main Street from utility savings. So how does America Saves work? We are just getting ready to wrap up our first year of America Saves. We've started working with a handful of Main Street communities. And so how we've been doing that is we've basically tried to identify strategically the Main Street programs that are of high capacity and like maybe have a very good base of volunteers or access to interns that can help with a data collection process. And so that piece actually just includes some basic building attributes. So this would be sort of similar to the survey that we did to develop our report that I mentioned using grad students, where we need to just identify some key physical characteristics about the buildings in these Main Street and commercial districts, paired with 12 months of historic utility usage data. And so once we collect that data, we are able to do, through our project team for America Saves, a remote energy audit for all of the buildings in the business district. That remote energy audit is really great because it produces a report that goes back to the business owner that outlines a prioritized list of opportunities for increase in efficiency and energy savings. And so combined with that, you also have really great list of existing utility incentive programs. And so not only do you get the prioritized list, but then you get some kind of like local customized information about what already exists through your utilities that you can tap into, and our team is here to help do that. And then the third piece of it is some really great and simple free or low-cost energy efficiency strategies for your building type, and that's based on the building type. And so essentially then after the business owner gets the report, we then work with local utility partners to kind of develop a partnership and support where we can then help facilitate some of these actual retrofits to happen, which would ideally include using local contractors, maybe even kind of tapping into a network of contractors that have already been pre-vetted by some of these communities. So we really try to think about keeping the money locally in the economy and also contributing to jobs. So our next steps, like I said, we're working with some communities already in the country. And as you can see, recently we've added 2 cities in Ohio, Dayton, so looking at downtown Dayton, and then also the Main Street community of Piqua. So we're really excited. We were actually just there in Ohio a couple of days ago, earlier this week. So we met with people in Dayton and Piqua and kind of set up our plan for America Saves in both of those communities. And I wanted to mention something local to Ohio. Through our work with Dayton, downtown Dayton, we are going to be, America Saves will be at this Dayton Green Expo that's happening on September 11th from 10 to 5 in Dayton on the campus of University of Dayton. And this is a really great opportunity for anybody that's on the call today to register for free, come to the expo, and the expo is, like I said, from 10 to 5. There's kind of an exhibition hall piece of it, but they also have sessions. And one of the sessions will be about America Saves and specifically what we're doing with Dayton and Piqua in the state of Ohio. So we would love to have any other interested communities or community representatives attend the session and talk with us. So it'll be myself and Lindsay Wallace from the National Main Street Center that will be at the expo presenting on America Saves. So I just wanted to make sure to put in a plug for that event. Okay, we're going to switch gears and move on to the next program, which is the Partnership for Building Reuse. This is a really great program, also a 3-year program that we kicked off with the Urban Land Institute in, let's see, about a little over a year ago now. And this was our pilot here in LA. And actually, currently, we are wrapping up similar work in Philadelphia and Baltimore. And then we'll be moving on to Chicago and even a 5th city later this fall, maybe going into the winter. So this partnership really came out of this report that I mentioned a little while ago, the Greenest Building, which was talking about the environmental value of building reuse and just building reuse in general as opposed to demolition. And so this report underlines the fact that it can take between 10 to 80 years for a new energy efficient building to overcome the climate change impacts created by its construction, also taking into account the demolition that's required of an existing building to accommodate for a new building to be built. So the Urban Land Institute was interested in partnering with us, using this report sort of as a foundation to look at building reuse strategies and opportunities, also barriers, in 5 big cities in the country. So just in case you're not too familiar with the Urban Land Institute, I just wanted to point it out. It's a national nonprofit research and education organization that has a large membership base, more than 40,000 members worldwide. And these are typically members from real estate, development, city staff, people from the nonprofit world. Like, for example, I'm a member. There's a number of people at the National Trust for Historic Preservation that are members. Anyone who is interested in the development and redevelopment of cities really would benefit from a membership through ULI. This is just their mission statement for additional context. Okay, moving into what we found in LA and what we did, the kind of the strategy that we took. So we started by looking at development trends. We started with a development trend analysis where we really looked at what's going on with buildings. Where's the new construction? Where's the demolition? What are the current trends that are taking place? So in order to do that, we developed a methodology, identified key stakeholders. A big piece of this is getting a ton of local people involved, the local decision makers, the players, the important people making a lot of these decisions. They needed to be at the table. So we made sure that we have them at the table. We presented research and maps that identified these trends kind of as a baseline to start the conversation about barriers and opportunities for reuse, and then that led into a conversation about solutions to overcome the obstacles, the barriers, and then ultimately ended with an action plan that we left with the city, essentially, through the through ULI's local office in LA. So just to give you, I'll walk through some of the maps that we did. I'll probably go through them fairly quickly because we're getting a little close on time. I want to make sure to get through the third piece of this presentation. So some of the maps we did was just to kind of lay a foundation, make sure that everybody was operating under the same understanding. We really wanted to highlight opportunities for building reuse in, older and existing buildings. And so, like, for example, just in LA, this is kind of an interesting map. These are all of the buildings that were built prior to World War II, and then contrast that with the blue and purple and green buildings built post-World War II. So we have, quite a distinction here. The city of LA is huge, but obviously you can tell that located central to downtown is the majority of the older buildings prior to World War II, but also a ton of the 1946 to 1965 buildings in the blue shade. So really interesting opportunities for building reuse in LA in that particular set of buildings. We also did a map of demolitions over the last 10 years. So these gray dots represent every demolished building, commercial buildings, and apartments from the last 10 years, and then contrast that with the new buildings, the green dots. So this allowed us to really identify areas where there were demolitions and new construction happening at the same place. So that kind of highlighted areas for, potential building reuse opportunity, like why was the building demolished and replaced with a new one? Could there have been a different set of strategies to reuse that building instead of demolish it, and that sort of thing. This kind of gives us an interesting look at the percentage of buildings that are being demolished in LA versus their age. And so we've got the first chart here shows the percentage of the building stock for each of these decade breakdowns compared with the percentage of those buildings that have been demolished. And so you see that the higher demolition rates are actually taking place from 1946 to 2001, and so the blue and the purple. So this is kind of where we ended up focusing a lot of our work. It helped us focus on these buildings rather than the pre-World War II buildings. We zeroed in on downtown as a test ground. And so this is a photo, an aerial photo of downtown. We did a similar set of maps where we looked at the year build. And we really tried to, characterize the buildings in downtown. It's a really interesting place for those of you who haven't visited. There's a ton of really old buildings, really great blocks with all original buildings. There's a lot of old movie theaters, just tons of buildings that are ripe for reuse. And many of them have been reused, but many of them are still sitting fairly vacant. Also a lot of new office buildings, so you've got a real mix. A big piece of this analysis was looking at vacancy rates. So here's the office vacancy. Red represents highest. And retail vacancy, red also represents highest. So definitely we've got an area of potential opportunity, but also maybe a space that highlighted some of the challenges in these red buildings, red office buildings in downtown. So some of our findings and recommendations. We used, like I said, a set of stakeholders that included a lot of these types of people. So people from real estate, construction, preservation, government, housing, downtown revitalization. These were the people that really informed many of our discussions and ultimately helped develop the strategies and the action plan. So some of the high points in LA is that we wanted to build on this existing successes. They have a really great adaptive reuse ordinance that's been in place for 12 years already. This is focused on downtown primarily, and it really incentivized and encouraged a lot of building reuse that just wasn't happening up until that point. And what that did was it created 14,000 new downtown residents in downtown LA in a relatively small area. So 60 building rehabilitations, primarily they were office to apartment or condo, but it really just in a short period of time inserted a huge chunk of new residents that were living in downtown, which has been really successful. Some of the barriers that we found, we kind of broke them down into 4 different categories. This is market. So just for example, in downtown, there's a shrinking supply of buildings that are really ripe for reuse, and so that's one of the challenges. We've got financial barriers that were identified through our stakeholder meetings. I'm not going to go over everything. Technical barriers, regulatory barriers. So we just categorized all of the barriers, and then we started working towards identifying solutions, which was the exciting part. So here's an opportunity. We wanted to focus on downtown reuse. Everyone decided that there's still a good number of unused buildings, vacant buildings, that can be reused in downtown. So we really wanted to focus a lot of our recommendations on that. So another opportunity is that there's demand for new uses in LA, as well as other kind of similar hot market cities, maybe even some mid-market cities. So one of those examples would be creative office space. A lot of the creative office space wants to be in these older buildings that have a lot of character, and so that's a really cool opportunity that can be paired nicely with an existing building. Another opportunity that was that LA was getting ready to rewrite their zoning code, and so we decided that we wanted to try to influence that process and be a part of the conversation. So we developed an action plan to encourage reuse, like I said. These are 3 main pieces of the action plan. Integrate building reuse as a goal in the zoning code update. Streamline the building permitting and approval process in the planning department, and then create support for policy reforms that incentivize building reuse. So what's next? We are still, even though we engaged with LA over a year ago now, we are still working in LA. This work kind of spun off additional opportunities and projects, and so that's a really great thing. We're involved in a couple of mayor's initiatives, which is really great, looking at streets and kind of how economic development and small business play a role. Here's our schedule, like I mentioned, how we're working in Philadelphia and Baltimore, Chicago, and an additional city. And then in 2015, 2016, there will be a national summit on building reuse, and then a publication from ULI that will be a 10 principles publication. It's something that ULI does that will really try to sum up some kind of overarching principles about building reuse that would hopefully apply to any city. So now quickly transitioning to the third piece, and then hopefully we have a few minutes for question and answer. I'm going to go through this really quickly. This is our newest report. It's a really exciting report. It's basically, the way I like to explain it, and this is what it says on the screen, is it takes Jane Jacobs' theories about the importance of fine-grained mixed use, or fine-grained mix of old and new buildings in neighborhoods, and applies statistics and metrics to it, and really tests for theories. So it's a really exciting report that just measures how older, smaller buildings contribute to neighborhood vitality. Okay, and like I said, we focused on 3 pilot cities to kind of apply this research, which was Seattle, San Francisco, and Washington, D.C. So the main purpose, like I said, was to identify the contributions of older, smaller scale buildings and blocks in cities to vitality. And the way we did that was we took 40 different performance metrics. Here's a list of 6 of them. And we mapped them, we tested them, we analyzed them, we performed statistical models on those metrics. We did a number of things. And the results of those metrics analyses are in our report. But there's this really great way that we kind of summarize the key findings, and I'm going to run through those right now. And I think they're really useful. So older mixed-use neighborhoods are more walkable. I think probably everybody knows that, but we were able to statistically prove this and just make the point, again, through metrics and analysis that this is the case. So these are the neighborhoods with the older, smaller buildings, typically. And so just once again, underline how these buildings play a role in creating neighborhoods that people want to be in. Another one, young people level buildings. We looked at a lot of demographics data to figure out where people are living, how old they are, and one of the things we found was that, yes, definitely younger people are living in these neighborhoods with a lot of old buildings. Another great headline and findings, nightlife is most alive on streets with a diverse range of building age. So this is a really interesting one because it actually highlights the interaction between old buildings and new buildings, and how neighborhoods that have old and new are the ones that are vibrant, especially at night. The creative economy thrives in older mixed-use neighborhoods. So this kind of goes back to one of the things I said at the very beginning about how older, smaller buildings are perfect places for the creative economy to locate and rent spaces, because they're often more affordable and also have a lot of those characteristics and qualities that are interesting. Older business districts offer opportunities for entrepreneurs of all backgrounds. So we found this through a lot of census data and analysis of the census data, that these neighborhoods, business districts with older, smaller buildings have a really nice, diverse array of business owners in these neighborhoods. Older, smaller buildings provide space for a strong local economy. So just like the creative economy, the local economy likes to be in neighborhoods with older, smaller buildings. Older commercial and mixed-use districts contain hidden density. This is a really important one, I think, especially in cities that are going through, and most of them are, debates about density and kind of traditional density definitions versus maybe a more creative or nuanced definition of density. And this picture right here is a really cool example of a building in Seattle. It's probably no more than 15,000 square feet, maybe even less. And what you see is it's a kind of like an open-air marketplace, but it's a really great example of how you have a whole bunch of different businesses in a relatively small building. You've got different opening and closing hours. In this same building, there's an event space down in the basement, and so that's like a nighttime use. And then you've got a place that serves coffee that would be open early in the morning, and then you've got a wine bar here, you've got a florist, you've got restaurants, and so this building really epitomizes how a small building can contain all of these different uses open during, that can almost be a 24/7 type building and work really hard for being a fairly small building. And so it's a different way of looking at density. And if you read the writing here underneath the headline, it says that these areas have significantly more jobs per commercial square foot, which is a really interesting fact that was identified through this research. So that sums up my presentation, and I just wanted to leave you with this page here that shows all the different ways you can connect with the Green Lab. So we have a weekly sustainability roundup email where we usually include 5 to 7 news articles from the week that kind of relate in some way to either sustainability or preservation or the intersection of both. We also have our website on the National Trust parent website. And then we've got a lot of sustainability tagged blog articles through both Preservation Nation and the Preservation Leadership Forum blog. We also have a sustainability affinity group, which is available to forum members. And then we also have our Twitter account that is fairly active and kind of acts as a support for the roundup. And so we like to share a lot of articles, but also the current work that the Green Lab is doing. So I think with that, I can take questions in the last 5 minutes.
Well, great. Thank you very much, Jeana. That was certainly a lot of good information. I'm curious, do you have a specific space on your website, like a page that has links to all of those publications that you shared early on?
Yeah, so I would say the homepage of the Green Lab is the best place to find that. We sort of have a bulleted list that represents our current work and past work, and with links to all of those reports.
Okay, great. Anyone who has any questions, you're welcome to type those in now. I don't see any questions yet, but I'll give attendees a couple minutes if they think of something that they'd like to ask. And I guess one of my own issues that I come across so often, it has to do with historic windows and energy efficiency. And people have been so well trained by the window salesman that there's no possibility to have energy efficiency and historic windows mutually coexisting. And so I guess I'm curious, have you seen how good of an impact that your work has done towards changing that kind of attitude?
So I would say that every time I present to kind of new preservation audiences, maybe like through statewide conferences or even the Trust National Conference. The Windows section is, I always try to include that. I didn't include it in this one actually. I mentioned it, but I didn't include slides about our report. But really, we're working on just making sure that we can communicate the results of our research and the findings of that report, because I think it's incredibly useful, and every preservationist that we present the Windows research to just loves it, and thinks that it finally gives them, I mean, in just like I think, in my opinion, is that it's one of the most useful things that we've done for just kind of day-to-day preservation, because I hear so many stories that people never have, they feel like they don't have the tools or the research to come back at these arguments that you need to replace the Windows. And so I think that we're still trying to just make sure to communicate the findings of the report, but
Right.
people always give us positive feedback when we present on that report and say that they absolutely feel like it's a strong technical tool for them as they move forward looking at these, looking at Windows. So I don't know if that helps. But.
Yeah. We have a question from Kurt. He asks, how will you identify the next city to partner with for the ULI partnership?
Yeah, that's a good question. We're still working on that. That work is funded by foundations. So it's kind of a combination of the local ULI district council, so their local office. They have to have the capacity and the interest, and then we generally, the Green Lab kind of has a list of, like a general list of cities or places in the country that we're interested in working, and a lot of that has to do with, where funders are and where our, what we could contribute to existing conversations, that sort of thing. And then what else? Yeah, I think it's probably a combination of the ULI District Council capacity and interest, and then our interest, and then where funders are interested. So it's kind of a process of figuring all of that out. So I think that that city will probably be announced as soon as we confirm funding.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Great to see Piqua and Dayton on the list of the America Saves. I'm curious if you can share, are there any other Ohio communities in the pipeline, or is it too late for other Ohio communities who are interested in participating to look at that partnership?
Yeah, it's definitely not too late. I would just say that Piqua and Dayton were kind of the early adopters that jumped on the opportunity from the beginning. But we are absolutely looking for other Ohio Main Street and community organizations or BIDs or CDCs in both the bigger cities and the smaller towns to express interest. We have a survey on our website through the America Saves page that is sort of a to let us know you're interested. So if people are interested, they can, well, first of all, they can email me. They can email Lindsay Wallace at the National Main Street Center if they're a Main Street community. She's the America Saves project manager for the National Main Street Center. Or they can go to the America Saves website and fill out the survey. And that sort of is like a community survey that gives us some information about the community, number of businesses in the business district, utility names, that sort of thing.
Okay, that sounds great.
Yeah.
I don't see any more questions, so Jeana, thanks so much for joining us today. We appreciate the great information that you were able to share with us. And for our folks on the webinar, I want to make sure to invite you to join us in September, specifically the 10th of September for our next webinar. We'll have Jessica Flores from the State Historic Preservation Office in Michigan speaking with us about weatherization. So I hope you all can make our next webinar in September. Otherwise, no other questions, so I'll send along best wishes for everyone to have a great day. Thanks so much.